This video is about Israel's fight for existence in a turbulent region. Subscribe for more. In the heart of the Middle East, amidst the sun-scorched deserts and rugged mountains, lay the nascent state of Israel, a beacon of hope for many, but a focal point of conflict for others. It was 1948, a year marked by fervent determination and desperate struggles as the newly declared state prepared to defend its existence against a backdrop of hostility. The air was thick with tension, as neighboring Arab nations prepared to crush this fledgling democracy, believing it an affront to their sovereignty. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows over the fledgling settlements. Among the settlers was David Cohen, a young Jewish fighter hardened by the scars of World War II. He was not only a soldier, but also a survivor of the horrors faced by his kin in Europe. The memories haunted him, the faces of friends and family lost in the concentration camps, the sights of destruction that had marked his homeland before he fled to the New World. Driven by a fierce will to protect his people, David joined the Haganah, the underground paramilitary organization that would form the backbone of the Israeli Defense Forces. As David trained with fellow fighters, they exchanged stories of their pasts, binding them together in a shared purpose. Among them was Miriam, a skilled marksman whose sharp eyes and steady hands concealed the heart forged in resilience. She had fled Germany as a child, escaping the darkness that engulfed Europe, only to find herself confronting a different kind of peril in the land she now called home. The two quickly formed a bond, both drawn together by their shared experiences and fierce commitment to the survival of their people. Meanwhile, the world watched, particularly the United States, where President Harry Truman weighed the implications of supporting Israel. America was torn between its sympathies for Jewish people seeking refuge and the geopolitical realities of the region. Truman's decision to recognize Israel came amidst a backdrop of post-war tension, a world grappling with the ramifications of the Holocaust and the burgeoning Cold War. He understood that aligning with Israel could shape alliances and provoke reactions, particularly from Germany, still reeling from defeat and facing its own identity crisis. As dusk fell, David and Miriam gathered with their comrades around a flickering fire, sharing intelligence about the approaching armies. Reports came in that Egypt, Syria, and Jordan were mobilizing. The encroaching threat loomed like a storm on the horizon, a nightmare that David had fought so hard to escape. Miriam glanced at him, her expression grave. "They think they can wipe us out, just like they did in Europe," she said, steady but troubled. "That's why we must be strong," David replied, his voice rising with fervor. "We have to show them that we are willing to fight for our home, a home that we have yearned for against all odds." The flicker of the flames reflected in his eyes, mirroring the fire within him. As dawn broke, the sound of gunfire erupted in the distance. The first skirmishes had begun. David and Miriam sprang into action, racing toward the sound with their fellow fighters. Their hearts raced, fear intertwined with adrenaline as they prepared to face the oncoming storm of troops. The lush fields that had once promised peace were now stained with the remnants of conflict, the cries of the wounded fueling their resolve. In a nearby command bunker, the high-stakes negotiations with American diplomats unfolded. Truman's advisors warned him of the ramifications of youth support. Germany, still grappling with its past, had its own interests to protect. If the United States showed overt support for Israel, it risked alienating crucial alliances in the region, potentially destabilizing the fragile peace left in the wake of World War II. But Truman remained resolute. He understood the significance of a Jewish state as sanctuary for the persecuted, a second chance for survival. Back on the ground, David and Miriam found themselves in the thick of battle. The terrain, which had once been a refuge, was now a battleground stained with the blood of brothers and enemies alike. As bullets whizzed past, David's instincts kicked in, and he led his comrades with a mixture of strategy and raw courage. Each step taken echoed their shared history, the weight of lost lives now fueling their fight for existence. In the chaos, a sudden explosion rocked their position, sending debris flying. Miriam was knocked to the ground, her weapon slipping from her grasp. David rushed to her side, pulling her to safety just as another volley of gunfire erupted. "Stay with me," he urged, his eyes scanning for threats. "We have to fall back to the ridge." As they retreated, chaos reigned around them. Friends were lost, and the cries of the wounded pierced the air. The battle was relentless, and as David and Miriam regrouped with their comrades, the question hung heavy in their minds. Would they be able to withstand this onslaught and defend their right to exist? In the distance, black smoke billowed into the sky, marking the destruction of a nearby village. The enormity of their situation was not lost on David. This was a fight for survival, not just of land, but of identity and history, a confrontation that echoed the very foundations of their existence. The memories of Europe's darkest days surged back, fueling his rage and determination. "We will not go quietly," he shouted to his fellow fighters, his voice hoarse but unwavering. As night fell once more, the fighters exchanged words of encouragement, steeling themselves for what lay ahead. The unexpected support from some Jewish diaspora communities in the United States began to trickle in, but would it be enough? Could they not only survive, but thrive in a region that seemed intent on extinguishing their flame? Meanwhile, in Washington, Truman's decision loomed. Would he gamble on the future of a nation that had yet to prove itself amid a storm of warfare? Would the long shadows of Europe's past dictate the actions of the free world? As the battles raged on and the fate of Israel teetered on the edge, the stakes could not have been higher. The future of nations hinged upon the actions taken and the alliances formed in these critical moments. David and Miriam, now bound not only by shared struggles but by the gravity of their mission, prepared to face their destiny. The echoes of gunfire resonated through the valleys, a harbinger of the fierce struggle ahead. With the heart of a lion and the spirit of warriors past, they braced for the dawn of a new day, a day that would determine whether they would rise from the ashes or be crushed by the weight of history. But as the night deepened, uncertainty clouded the horizon. How many battles would they need to endure, and how far would they be willing to go to secure their place in a world that seemed so set against them? The question lay heavy on their hearts, one that would soon lead to a reckoning that would ripple through the very fabric of nations. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, David and Miriam gathered their comrades in a makeshift command post, a small cave that had once been a refuge for shepherds. The air was thick with the scent of gunpowder mixed with the earthy aroma of the soil. Each fighter wore the weary expressions of those who understood that the fight for survival had only just begun. "Today, we need to push deeper into our territory," David said, his voice steady despite the tremors of uncertainty that coursed through him. "The enemy believes we are weak, that we will crumble at the first signs of resistance. We will show them the strength of our resolve." Miriam nodded, her eyes sharp. "They have numbers on their side, but we have our will and the right to fight for our homes. We cannot let fear taint our actions." As the sun climbed higher, casting a golden hue over the battlefield, David and his units engaged in a series of skirmishes with advancing Arab forces. The sounds of conflict echoed across the land, the crack of rifles, the thud of mortars, and the anguished cries of the wounded and dying. Each encounter only seemed to fuel their determination, but the toll was becoming evident. Supplies were running low, and the weight of the losses began to weigh heavily on their minds. In the midst of a firefight, David spotted an enemy unit flanking from the east. "Miriam, cover me," he shouted as he dashed for high ground, seeking a vantage point. Bullets whizzed around him, but adrenaline surged through his veins, propelling him onward. He reached a small hill, crouched behind a boulder, and began to return fire with precision, picking off enemy combatants one by one. Miriam, meanwhile, moved with the grace of a hawk, her rifle steady in her hands. She knew the stakes all too well. This wasn't just a battle for land, but a fight for the very survival of their people. With each shot she took, she felt the weight of the past behind her, the ghosts of those lost in Europe spurring her on. "For them, and for our future," she whispered as she pulled the trigger, her resolve unwavering. As the day wore on, the tide of battle shifted. The Israeli forces, fueled by desperation and the need to defend their nascent state, began to gain ground. However, their advances were met with fierce resistance, and the harrowing reality of their situation became increasingly apparent. David's heart sank as he watched as a fellow fighter fell caught in the crossfire. He felt the weight of grief settle upon him, a reminder of the fragility of life. The news of their small victories reached the command bunker, where American diplomats monitored the situation with growing concern. The stakes were higher than anyone could have anticipated. Truman's support for Israel was tested against the fierce reaction from the Arab world. Reports filtered in that Egypt was mobilizing its air forces, and the EU was left to weigh the implications of intervening further. President and advisor cautioned, "If we continue to support Israel, we risk alienating our allies in the region. We must tread carefully." Truman's gaze remained fixed on the map before him, the lines representing borders and the colors denoting alliances. He understood the deep historical ties between the Jewish people and their homeland, but the implications of war were complex. "We cannot turn our backs on those facing annihilation. We've seen too much horror already. We must act," he said, his voice firm, but a shadow of doubt lingered in his expression. Back in the battle zone, Israeli fighters received a glimmer of hope as news came of increased support from Jewish communities in America. Parcels of supplies began to arrive: ammunition, food, and medical kits. Each delivery felt like a lifeline, a testament to the solidarity and shared history that bound them together. David felt the renewed energy among his comrades as they shared rations and regrouped for the next assault. "Let us show them what we were made of," he said, rallying their spirits. "We are not just fighting for land. We are fighting for the very essence of who we are. Let us make our stand." The fighters moved with newfound vigor, planning their next offensive to reclaim lost territory. Under the cover of night, they stealthily advanced, using the darkness as their ally. David and Miriam led a small team toward a strategic position overlooking a key supply route for the enemy. As they neared their target, they could hear the distant chatter of enemy soldiers and the clang of equipment. David took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his responsibility. "We strike now," he whispered, positioning his team for the assault. Suddenly, as they prepared to move, a flash of light erupted from the enemy camp. An explosion echoed in the distance, sending a shockwave through the ground. "They re onto us," Miriam yelled, and they sprang into action, engaging the enemy before they could fully mobilize. The ensuing battle was fierce and chaotic. The air was thick with smoke, and the night erupted into a cacophony of gunfire and shouts. David could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, pushing him forward as he fought alongside his comrades. They were outnumbered, but the ferocity of their resolve fought against the odds. As dawn began to break again, David fought through the haze of chaos, eyes scanning for threats. Amid the struggle, he caught sight of a familiar figure. Miriam was pinned down behind a rock, her weapon jammed. Panic surged through him as he fought to reach her. "Miriam," he called, pushing through the line of fire as bullets whizzed by. Just a few feet away, he could see her struggling to reload as she glanced up, determination etched on her face. "I am fine, just need a second," she shouted back, but David could see the desperation in her eyes. He dove behind the rock beside her, shielding her with his own body as the firefight intensified. "We can lose you." "Not now," he urged, his voice hoarse. With a quick movement, he handed her a spare magazine, and together they opened fire, creating a barrier against the advancing enemy. The sound of their weapons mingled with the cries of battle, forming a symphony of survival reverberating through the land. As the sun rose higher, illuminating the battlefield, David felt a rush of hope mixed with the harsh reality of their situation. For every inch they gained, losses weighed heavily in their hearts. They were fighting not just for their land, but to reclaim their identity from a history that sought to erase it. In the midst of battle, David turned to Miriam, their eyes locking in a moment of fierce understanding. "This is for everyone who fought before us," he said, and together they renewed their assault, pushing through the enemy line with unyielding determination. But as the fight raged on, a new threat emerged on the horizon. A large convoy of enemy reinforcements was mobilizing. David's heart raced as he realized the fight was far from over. The battlefield was becoming a canvas of chaos, but amid the flames and smoke, a flicker of courage burned bright within him. As he and Miriam braced for the oncoming wave, the echoes of history whispered in their ears. This was a fight that would not only define their future, but challenge the very fabric of nations. What lay ahead was uncertain, and the shadows of their past loomed large, but David and Miriam stood ready to face whatever came next. The question hung heavy in the air. How many more battles would it take to secure not just their existence, but a future for their people? With the sounds of conflict ringing in their ears, they prepared to confront the storm that awaited them, knowing that the world was watching, and the stakes had never been higher. As the sun crested the horizon, casting a harsh light over the battlefield, David and Miriam surveyed the chaos that enveloped them. The heavy rumble of approaching enemy tanks and the distant roar of aircraft engines filled the air with dread. It was a new day, yet the weight of the previous night's struggle hung heavy in their hearts. The sound of gunfire had become a haunting melody, one that underscored their resolve but reminded them of their losses. "David, we need to regroup," Miriam said, her voice laced with urgency. "Our position is becoming untenable. If those reinforcements reach the front lines, we could be overrun." He nodded, the gravity of her words sinking in. The enemy had regrouped, and their numbers were swelling. The Israelis were fighting a desperate battle, each moment ticking away their chance to secure a foothold in this war for survival. "Let us fall back to the ridge and assess our options," David replied, raising his voice above the cacophony. They signaled to their comrades, gathering the remnants of their unit, weary but determined. As they retreated, David's mind raced with thoughts of the future. How could they withstand this onslaught? Each fighter's spirit ebbed and flowed with the tide of battle, and he knew they needed something to reignite their fight. Reaching the ridge, they established a temporary command post, utilizing the natural cover of the rocks to shield themselves from enemy fire. The urgency of their situation ignited their determination to devise a plan of strategic maneuver that would allow them not only to hold the ground but to push back against the advancing forces. "Listen up," David called, his voice steady as he gathered the remaining fighters. "We can't allow them to break through. We allow set up ambush points along the valley. If we can draw them into a choke point, we may be able to level the playing field." His gaze shifted from face to face, searching for signs of hope. "We are not just fighting for ourselves. We are fighting for our people, for our identity. We cannot let this fight define us. We must define it." The murmur of agreement rippled through the group, and they moved with renewed purpose, preparing for the inevitable clash that awaited them. Meanwhile, the sounds of the battlefield shifted, hinting at the enemy's advance. David positioned himself at the highest point along the ridge, scanning the horizon for signs of movement. Beside him, Miriam adjusted her rifle, her eyes narrowing as she focused on the approaching convoy. "David, look," she exclaimed, pointing toward the distant cloud of dust rising from the valley floor. "They were coming." The enemy convoy, a formidable line of trucks and armored vehicles, began to snake its way through the terrain, oblivious to the ambush that awaited them. David felt his pulse quicken. This was their moment. "Positions," he shouted, and each fighter took their place, adrenaline surging through their veins. As the vehicles drew nearer, David signaled for silence, tension crackling in the air. The soldiers around him held their breath, eyes fixated on the approaching enemy. The fate of their fight for existence hinged upon their ability to strike first and to strike hard. "On my mark," David whispered, feeling the weight of their hopes resting on his shoulders. 3, 2, 1, and now." He unleashed a barrage of fire, the rifle-s report echoing against the rocky hillsides. The ambush erupted in a storm of chaos, the element of surprise igniting flames of bravery among his comrades. Miriam joined him, each shot ringing out like a declaration of defiance against the tide that threatened to sweep them away. The enemy convoy erupted into disarray, soldiers scrambling from their vehicles, confusion painted across their faces. David saw their fear as they faced the unexpected assault, and it fueled his resolve. "Push forward," he yelled, charging into the fray, his weapon raised in defiance. The line of Israeli fighters surged, flooding the valley with determination. As they advanced, David could feel the presence of history behind him. Their fight mirrored the struggles of those lost in Europe, a resonance that surged through the generations. For every life sacrificed, they were reminded of the stakes at play. Fierce battle raged on, bullets whizzing through the air, punctuated by the thunder of explosions. David pushed through the chaos, his heart pounding. There was no retreat, no surrender. They were defenders of their destiny. Beside him, Miriam fought valiantly, her face a mask of focus and fury, embodying the spirit of resilience that drove them all forward. But as they pressed their advantage, a chilling realization swept over David. Despite the initial success of their ambush, the enemy forces were regrouping, and their response was swift and fierce. A loud explosion reverberated through the air as a mortar landed nearby, sending debris flying. David felt the shockwave throw him to the ground, and pain shot through his body as he hit the earth. "Miriam," he shouted, panic rising in his chest. He pushed himself upright, scanning the chaos for her familiar figure. The sight of her standing firm, rallying their fighters, brought him a flicker of relief amidst the turmoil. But that relief was short-lived. The enemy, now fully aware of their vulnerability, began to retaliate with force. Tanks rolled forward, their engines roaring as they crushed everything in their path. David could see that a tide was turning, and they needed to regroup once more. "Fall back," he bellowed, urging the fighters to retreat to higher ground. The chaos intensified around them, bullets striking closer, the air thick with smoke and confusion. As they fell back, David turned to Miriam, their eyes locking in a moment of shared understanding. "We can't let this be the end," he said, determination lacing his voice. "We need to regroup and find a way to turn this around." "Absolutely," she replied, her expression fierce and unwavering. "We've come too far to give up now. Our people are counting on us." They quickly re-established themselves on the ridge, using whatever cover they could muster. The sound of the enemy forces advancing felt like a relentless tide, but David stood firm, resolute in his belief that they would prevail. He could hear the distant rumble of tanks and the shouts of enemy commanders rallying their troops, a cacophony of war that threatened to drown out their resolve. But as the sun dipped lower in the sky, an unexpected sound reached his ears, the unmistakable hum of aircraft. David's heart raced as he glanced at the incoming planes, their silhouettes cutting through the twilight. "Is that," he began, hope igniting within him. "Might be American air support," Miriam exclaimed, her eyes lighting up with excitement. "If they were here, we might just have a chance." As the planes roared overhead, unleashing their payloads upon the enemy, David felt a surge of adrenaline. This was their lifeline, a chance to turn the tide and reclaim their fight for existence. The skies lit up with explosions, the sound of aircraft mingling with the cries of battle, and David's heart surged with hope. "Let us push forward while they redistract it," he shouted, the fire of determination igniting within him once more. With a rallied spirit, David led the charge, racing down from the ridge, the roar of the aircraft echoing in their ears. The Israeli forces surged forward, inspired by the arrival of their allies in the skies. The battle took on a new intensity, the strength of unity fueling their resolve to reclaim their homeland. But as they charged into the fray, David realized that the fight was far from over. The enemy would not back down easily, and the shadows of their past loomed large, a reminder of the struggles that had come before. Yet, hand in hand with Miriam and their comrades, they faced the future with unwavering courage. As they pressed their advantage, the question lingered: would the resolve of this new alliance be enough to shift the tide of history in their favor? Would the echoes of their fight resonate beyond the battlefield and shape the course of nations? With the sound of war raging all around them and the fate of their existence hanging in the balance, David and Miriam braced for the challenges ahead, ready to confront whatever storms awaited them. The dawn of a new chapter was upon them, and the fight for survival had only just begun. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting an orange glow over the battlefield as David and Miriam surged forward. The roar of American fighter planes above pierced through the chaos, their presence a beacon of hope. Each explosion from the sky seemed to breathe new life into the weary Israeli fighters, igniting their spirits as they advanced toward the enemy positions. The initial surprise of the enemy had begun to wane, but the Israeli soldiers pressed on, emboldened by the sight of their allies in action. "Now is our chance," David shouted, his voice cutting through the din of war. His eyes scanned the terrain ahead, taking note of the enemy's disarray. Soldiers scrambled to regroup, their confidence shaken by the sudden onslaught from the skies. David rallied his comrades, urging them to charge with him into the fray. Miriam was close at his side, her rifle steady and ready. "We have to take that ridge," she called out, pointing to a higher vantage point where enemy troops were beginning to regroup. "That will give us a clear line of sight and allow us to hold our ground. Let us move." David replied, sprinting ahead with a fierce determination. The two of them pushed forward, leading a small group of fighters toward the ridge. As they closed in, the enemy realized their mistake, and frantic shouts echoed across the field as they scrambled to fortify positions. But it was too late, the tide was turning. As they reached the ridge, David and Miriam took up positions behind boulders, their eyes scanning for targets. David felt the rush of adrenaline. This was the moment they had been fighting for. "We need to hold this position at all costs," he barked, squeezing the trigger of his rifle as an enemy soldier emerged from the brush below. The crack of gunfire mingled with the roars of the aircraft above. Each shot fired felt like a declaration of their resolve, a reminder of what they were fighting for, not just land, but for the memory of those lost in the darkness of Europe, for their right to exist as a people. They were no longer just soldiers, they were defenders of a legacy. Miriam's sharp eye found a target, and she fired with precision, her heart steady even amidst the chaos. Each enemy soldier that fell reminded her of the faces she had left behind, of those who had perished in the Holocaust. She fought not only for her survival, but to ensure that such darkness would never again overshadow her people. The battle raged on, and with each passing moment, the Israeli fighters gained ground. David's command was clear: they would not relent, would not falter. He shouted again and again, urging his comrades forward. They were fueled by a fierce sense of purpose, a burning desire to protect what little they had fought so hard to establish. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the battlefield, David caught a glimpse of the enemy's vulnerability. Tanks and troops were disorganized, struggling to counter the unexpected intensity of the Israeli assault. He shouted, raising his rifle and charging toward the enemy lines. Miriam was right behind him, her spirit unwavering. The Israeli fighters surged forward, emboldened by their leaders, charging into the fray with newfound fire. The enemy, now realizing the ferocity of their opponents, began to crumble under the weight of the relentless assault. "For our homes, for our future," David roared, leading the way into the heart of the chaos. Suddenly, a loud explosion erupted nearby. David felt the ground shake beneath him, and debris flew through the air. He shielded his eyes and pushed onward, determined not to let fear shatter the resolve that had been forged in the fires of their shared history. As the smoke cleared, he noticed an enemy machine gun nest just ahead, menacing and unmoving. "Miriam, cover me," he shouted as he sprinted toward the nest, dodging incoming fire. He could see the soldiers inside, their faces tense and focused on their targets. He felt the rush of adrenaline coursing through his veins as he reached the position, ducking low behind a fallen tank for cover. "Miriam, now," he yelled, and she fired with deadly accuracy, silencing the gunner before he could register the attack. David took advantage of the brief chaos to rush forward, tossing a grenade into the nest. The explosion lit up the night, and the Israeli fighters cheered as they surged past, reclaiming ground that once felt lost forever. With each enemy position dismantled, David felt the weight of their history propelling them forward. They were no longer just individuals in a fight, they were a collective force of resilience and hope, determined to carve their place into a history that had too often sought to erase them. As night fell, the battlefield transformed into a chaotic landscape of gunfire and shadows. But amidst the turmoil, a sense of victory began to take root. The remnants of the enemy forces were retreating, their morale shattered by the fierce resistance they had encountered. David could see the exhaustion etched into the faces of his comrades, but their spirits remained unbroken. "Push them back, we can let them regroup," David shouted, rallying his fighters for one final push. The air was thick with determination, the ghosts of their past urging them on. They were not just fighting against an enemy, they were fighting for their right to exist, for the stories of those who had come before them. As dawn approached, the sounds of battle began to fade. The Israeli forces pressed onward, and with each step, the hope of a new beginning loomed large. David and Miriam fought side by side, their bond forged in the crucible of conflict, their hearts aligned in purpose. Finally, as the first rays of sunlight broke through the horizon, a deafening silence fell over the battlefield. The enemy had retreated, their forces scattered and broken. The Israeli fighters stood together, weary but triumphant, their breaths heaving as they took in the magnitude of what they had accomplished. David turned to Miriam, pride swelling in his heart. "We did it," he breathed, disbelief mingling with relief. The weight of what they had fought for washed over him, life, identity, and history intertwined in a tapestry of resilience. Miriam smiled through her exhaustion, tears glistening in her eyes. "This is just the beginning, David. We've fought for our survival, but we must continue to build and grow." The two of them stood hand in hand, gazing out over the battlefield that had been stained with loss yet illuminated by hope. In the coming days, news of their victory spread, not just across the region, but around the world. The United States, witnessing the resilience of the Israeli people, moved to strengthen its support. Truman's initial gamble had proven wise. The fight for Israel had ignited discussions that would shape the geopolitical landscape for years to come. Meanwhile, David and Miriam returned to their community, determined to rebuild what had been lost. With each day, they shared their stories, reminding their people of the strength that had brought them through the darkness. Together, they would forge a future, standing united against the shadows of history, a testament to their fight for existence. As the sun rose higher in the sky, David and Miriam knew that while battles would continue, their resolve would remain unshaken. They had withstood the storm, their fight echoing through time, a story of survival etched into the annals of history, a reminder that from the ashes of struggle, a new dawn would always emerge.